So, mark making, that's the first thing that we're talking about in this surface design class. We are going to go through a ton of different techniques and glazes and how to play with things and how I think about playing with things. But the first thing that we're going to talk about tonight is just mark making and how we can just carve into clay and make different marks and shapes like that. So, I got a bunch of different examples. These are all just marked and glazed. You'll want to make marks on your pot when they are leather hard. So if they get bone dry, that is way too dry, you're not going to be able to make any of those marks. I have 2 big containers of just things that we can play around with. This bowl is up for grabs to just play with. You can also use all your test tiles that we made last time. So I had a bunch of people in the last class, they had all these little test tiles. When they're still leather hard, you can go in and you can see what different marks make with these tools. Like when I look at this one, I'm like, oh, that's a fun little spear thing, but scooping out can do something different than dragging it or poking in with it. You can play a lot with a bunch of these, and there's a ton of different shapes, there's a ton of different sizes, there's fun things like this. You could take out little kind of like that. There is this little guy's kind of fun. It looks, I don't know, like a little, it's got a little in the middle. Yeah, like a little 2-pronged fork. So the cool thing about this is if I drag it along a piece, I can get a parallel line. But what I can also do is go in and just push in and make little dots that way. So all these tools have a ton of different ways that we can play with them. And the cool thing about making marks like this is that glazes will react really differently depending on if there is any surface on there. So when I look at this one, this came from the last surface design class. They were just playing around with making marks. This is dipped in the blue-green. When the blue-green gets really thick and it pulls down in those creases, it gets really rich and it gets really thin up along the carving lines. It kind of makes those leaves glow. So that's a fun way that you can play around with glaze to make those marks a lot more poppy. Same with like this one. This to me looks like maybe something like this. Taking a bunch of little notches out, just in rows, just a bunch of little notches. And they picked a nice runny glaze. So on the peaks of those little marks, so we've got in between the marks, say we've got a mark right here, and we've got a mark right here. When those marks meet together, there's a really raised edge, and the glaze doesn't have enough material to sit on, so it wants to run off of that. So on those peaked edges, it gets really thin, and you can see there's almost like a barrier of white around that. That's that clay poking through. Because it's so narrow, there's not enough clay for the glaze to stick onto. So it gets really thin, and then it pools down in those in the marks below. So it really shows off that blue. Same with this one. This we tried to recreate in the last class. I don't think we got it quite there, but we can make it happen in this class. My guess is this is a ball tool like this. It's a ball stylus. We've got a bunch up in the front, and they come in a bunch of different sizes. I don't know if I have my big one down here. So if you want to go real crazy, make some big old marks, you can use this. We've got some tiny ones here. There should be a slightly bigger one than this up in the front as well. The way that we thought that they were making those marks is they kind of pulled it down and then increased the pressure as they went. So I'm going to do a couple and then flip it and show you. So kind of pushing down, increasing the pressure as you go. Get rid of all those little burrs, and it makes that tiny little, those little sweeps. So we just want to play. We want to mess around with a bunch of different tools, make a bunch of different marks, and see what it can do with glazes. Thinking about trimming with this piece, there's these raised edges right here. When they trim this, it was a completely solid cylinder that was this thick all the way, but they just kind of blocked out an area, trimmed more here, and then trimmed more here to leave this raised. So no clay was added, just more clay was taken out here and more clay was taken out here. Then, once they were done trimming it and it was leather hard, they went in with a tool kind of like this, and they went in and just took out notches all the way down. And then after they glazed the piece, they took a sponge, wiped those off, and then you get that raw clay and the glaze contrast. So there's no, adding clay or anything. It's just thinking about trimming. So taking off more here and more here to leave a raised bit, and then scraping out some clay in between those. And you could do that on something like this as well. So if I have a thicker pot and I'm trimming it, I could say, okay, I'm gonna leave a notch here, I'm gonna leave a notch here, I'm gonna leave a notch here, I'm gonna leave a notch here. So going in with like the flat edge and taking out a notch in between where you want those notches to be, and then going in and making all those little marks.
So that band also ends up acting as a place where the heat gets dissipated.
Exactly, so it's a place to hold, and this is a little bit, so because it's raw clay, it's a little bit groggier. It's got some more texture to it, so when I hold it, it sticks to my hand a little bit better. If this was wet and it was condensating, it might slip out of my hands a little bit easier. This has a lot more texture, it's something to hold on to. And yeah, it's thicker there too, so it's not gonna be as hot as it is compared to up here, and those grooves are gonna let air hang out. So, it's got a ton of function, but it's also a really cool design. So, it's just something to think about. I really like feeling pots and the feeling of things. So like when I grab this, when I'm using it, I'll run my thumb along this as I'm using it because I like the feeling of that. So that's something you be conscious about. If you're making marks and they're really sharp and jagged, like when I look at these, like right there, those have some really sharp bits to it. I don't think I would like grabbing that, but these ones are a lot softer. They're a lot more like this. It has a nice feeling to it, so when I'm using it, it's something to kind of play with, and it feels nice. This one is a guess. My guess is that they took something like this, or something like this, and they just took little gashes out of it. And it's kind of the same thing as this one and this one, where it pools down in the cracks below and gets really thin up here. So this, super, super simple. You're just going in, you're not thinking about it, you're just making a bunch of gashes, and it just adds a little bit more to the pot. And then when that glaze runs, it gets down in those cracks and makes it really defined. And then this one, this to me just looks like a little stamp that they had. And you could use anything for a stamp. You could find, I don't know, heck, you could use the end of this toothbrush. Put some little punches in it. Oh my gosh, look at that. We got squares. So, it's just things to play with and try out and just see what glazes will do on it. I did a couple pots in school that I really, really liked, and all they were notches all the way around. So I think I had 3 or 4 terraces of notches that I just took out with a trimming tool, and I just went all the way around, and then picked a really runny glaze, and it made the arches, or those high bits, really thin, and then it pooled down in the bits below. So it's just a fun way to add a little bit of character and surface to your pot. It's good to practice on stuff beforehand so you can see what all these different tools do. There's no right tool for a job, there's no wrong tool for a job, there's just better or worse tools for a job. So play around. I don't know, if you want to go real crazy, I've got this sweet bent fork that Deb gave me. Don't know what it's for, but if you want to just go in and start making some little squares that way, that could be really fun. And maybe because I have those really tiny squares, I'll go in and I'll outline it with these big squares. So that's a fun little design that I used a toothbrush and a fork with. So it's just playing. We just want to play and have fun. The best tools are ones that we find and ones that we make up with. You can go buy really expensive tools that will make a perfect square, but a little toothbrush, why the heck not use that? So that is the plan that I want you guys to do today. Is if you have things to trim them up and play with them. If you have little test tiles, you guys can cut those to size. I would just take a damp sponge and do a little bit of cleanup on these, and then you can go in and play, and you can say, okay, I'm gonna see what this tool does. I'm gonna make some little marks with that, play around, see what happens. And then a good thing to do would be bisque fire them, and then we can play around with some of the runnier glazes and see like, oh, well, what if I did 3 layers of glaze just in an area because we can't do 3 layers on the whole thing, but if I had this, and I wanted to see what these ridges would do with glaze on top of them, I could do the whole thing in 2 coats, and then a third just up on that top half. So it's not 3 coats on the whole thing, but I can see if I had 3 glazes, if it gets really runny, what's gonna happen on all these ridges? Is it gonna get crazy? Is it gonna look weird? Is it gonna cover those up too much? So that's the point of these test tiles, is just to play with and make marks and see what the glazes will do with those. Okay, that's a lot. I got real excited there for a couple of minutes, and I was just like, we gotta get going. Does anyone have any questions about what I've talked about? Yes.
The little pinholes,
Yes.
how do those not get covered up with glaze?
It depends on the glaze. So the salt yellow is not, this is a really thin coat of the salt yellow, and the reason I can tell it's a thin coat is I can see this kind of toasty brown on there. When the salt yellow gets thicker, like right there, it gets a more opaque white. If I was to do a really thick coat, or maybe even 2 coats of the salt yellow, those would probably get filled up. But because it was such a thin coat, they won't get filled. That's a great thing that you can test with. But yeah, and I mean, I'm guessing even if it was a little bit thicker, you'd still be able to see like kind of the ideas of dots, but it might not be completely. And that's a good thing. You can always, you know, if you have a test tile and you go in with like this guy, this is too dry to work with, but I could go in and I could make a line of dots on here. So a couple lines, and then do like 1 dip in the whole thing of a color, 2 dips, and then 3 dips. And see, so like say I did the crocus. If I did 1 dip of crocus here, 2 dips of crocus there, and then 3 dips of crocus up here, I can see where the threshold is. Like, oh, 1 dip doesn't cover anything, 2 dips kind of covers, 3 dips definitely covers.
Okay, you said we can't do 3 dips on the whole pot, but you could do it on like half the thing.
Correct. So like if I have this piece right
Explain
here,
that a little bit, why?
so if I have 3 coats of glaze on the entire thing, say I want to do a dip of the matte white, of the crocus, and the stormy on the whole thing. I did the whole thing in the matte white, whole thing in the crocus, whole thing in the stormy. There's going to be too much glaze on here, and it's going to want to run off. So if I have it on the entire piece, when it's right up against the bottom, if I only have that 1/8 of an inch, it's going to run right down. It's going to stick to the shelves. If I did 2 coats on the whole thing, that's plenty. That's not going to drip off. You'll be totally fine. So if I know that 3 coats is going to run, and I want to see that running, I could just do it on like the top half for that 3rd coat. So I could dip the whole thing in 2 coats. So 1 whole dip in the crocus, 1 whole dip in the stormy, and then just the top half in that 3rd color. So that if it does run, my guess is it's not going to run 4 inches. It'll probably run like maybe 1 inch, maybe 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch, 2 inches if I really went crazy. But my guess is it's not going to run all the way down. So 2 dips is fine. 3 dips is okay if it's only on the top half or just on the rim. Or on the inside of a piece. Inside's totally fine, because if it were to run, it would just run right down the bottom. So it wouldn't, the only reason we don't do 3 dips on the entire thing is so that it doesn't ruin the kiln shelves and doesn't stick the pot to the shelf. Good question. All right, any others? Okay, it's your guys' time to play and have fun. Please use up all these tools. Please use this bowl for making marks. Please use your test tiles for making marks. The red ribs, we got a whole bucket of them, or a whole bag of them. They are gonna live right up here. So if you need them, let me know. Or if you can grab them, you can. There's also a step ladder right over there. Or you can ask somebody to grab them down for you. You know what? They're gonna live right here, actually. That'll make it a lot easier. So we're gonna put them in this box. Just make sure you're putting them back in this bag when you're done with them. That would be greatly appreciated. So right in here, good to go. They're gonna change your life. All right, let's get going, you guys. Thanks.
Looks like a lot to do.
I know. We got time though. Don't you worry.